How do we know what we know about turfgrass science? Welcome to Turfgrass Epistemology. Hello, good evening. Welcome to Turfgrass Epistemology. I'm Travis Shaddix. I made it. I've said before they should do a behind-the-scenes video of me putting this show together. It would be more interesting, I swear. If I told you what would happen right before the show started, I don't think anybody would believe me. But anyway, I'm here, and I think everything's working. So welcome to Turfgrass Epistemology. My name is Travis Shaddix. This show attempts to answer the question, how do we know what we know about turfgrass science? Tonight, we're going to go over a very important article about liquid aeration. We're going to show the only evidence I'm aware of that or about liquid aeration in turfgrass systems. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Pro Member podcast, and we're going to have a mini Tenfold turfgrass at the end. Okay, a tiny Tenfold turfgrass at the end. It's only a couple of minutes long. Okay, I don't know where else to put it, so I'm going to put it at the end, and it goes exactly with this article tonight. So I'm here. So Mike Conroy has a question, and that's exactly what I'm going to talk about right now. For the pro members, I'm trying to do something special for just the pro members. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to figure out a way to provide a narrative of research publications in a fast, quickly accessed way that doesn't require me a whole lot of time. So in other words, let's say an article comes out yesterday, and I'm not going to get to it for a month or two or three or whenever, or a year. I want to figure out a way that I can quickly take that article, generate a podcast, and get it to at least the pro members. I've tried a couple of ways. If you're a pro member, you can go to the pro member. There's a podcast in YouTube, and only pro members have access to that. It's an AI generated podcast. It requires very little of my time, but it's not really giving me what I want. But I think I figured out a different way to do it. So the next ones that come out, I'm trying to keep the podcast on those topics very short, like less than 10 minutes. Here's an article, less than 10 minutes. This is what they did. This is why it's important to you. But I don't have a lot of time to do that. So I'm trying to figure out an efficient manner to do that. I think I figured out a different way than what's already been posted. I have 2 podcasts loaded now on YouTube, only accessible to the pro members. But I think I figured out a different way now, so that is even more efficient than what I did. And it doesn't have some of the inflection issues with the voice that's on that AI podcast. It doesn't have some of the mispronunciations and things like that I kind of annoy me on those 2 first attempts. So I'm not using you as a guinea pig, pro members. In other words, I'm doing it just for pro members. I'm going to keep doing it just for pro members. I'm not going to switch it over because you all know I'm not interested in giving myself more work. But for the pro members, I asked myself, well, why would someone be a pro member? There's a couple of really good reasons. We have a pro member meeting about every 3 or 4 months in which we just talk about stuff. You get a free Calendly appointment with me, a meeting with me every year, which pays for the pro membership if you're going to do that anyway. So those are 2 key things. But I also thought, well, let me try to do something else. And that would be basically a 10-minute podcast that talks about a current research article, or it could be past research articles, and quick to the point and done. And if you don't like it, that's fine. It's just an additional bonus for you being a pro member. But I'm trying to figure out a way to do that. So bear with me while I get through some of the speed bumps and hurdles. I'm going to do it through AI, but it's going to be different than what you just heard. What you heard, for those pro members who listen to it, is pretty good, but it's not what I want. So that's what that is, Mike. So bear with me while I get through some of the work out some of the kinks on that podcast. Okay. Yeah, thanks, Eric, for letting me know you can hear and see me. 5 minutes before the show started, the whole thing shut down. The whole computer just crashed and shut down, and I had to get everything back up. So it's fine. It's all good. Yeah, Shawnee, yeah. Don't forget to like and subscribe and consider becoming a member, which contributes to Turfgrass Research. Thanks for Shawnee for reminding me. I need all the help I can get reminding me of that stuff. I always forget to remind people. I'm so focused on this stuff. And subscribe, be a member. Any revenue supports the channel, and then anything left over supports Turfgrass Research, which is becoming more expensive. But the members are growing, and we've got a lot of new members in the last 2 or 3 weeks. And I want to make sure that the new members know that if you're a regular member, go into the posts on my YouTube channel. And I updated the post for the Calendly invitations, and you get half off the Calendly appointments with me if you're a regular member, which essentially pays for, well, it does. It pays for the membership if you're going to do that anyway. And if you're a pro member, there's a separate link for pro members. Okay, so be sure to check those posts if you just joined as a member. I appreciate your membership and your supporting what I do. Okay, if you have a question, leave it in the chat. I'm going to get to this. We're going to do an article. We're going to show mostly graphs, the results mostly in graphs, because I think it makes more sense that way. And then I'm going to have a short tenfold turfgrass at the end, okay? The topic we've been going over is water. We've been talking about water intervals and application amounts and so forth. And this article tonight is going to talk a little bit about moisture. So I didn't know where else to fit it, and I think it was Shawnee reminding me that this came out several months ago, and I just hadn't done it yet. But to set the stage here, one of the most common or most frequently encountered cons in the lawn care industry, lawn care specifically, is this idea of liquid aeration. This is promoted by charlatans like John Perry and BS artists like Alan Hain, and there's a lot of big name people out there that promote this. Even True Green, Kimlon, sells liquid aeration, and it has not yet been shown one way or the other whether or not it actually does anything about aerating the soil or loosening compaction or anything like that, because there was never any research, there was never anything published on it. And so this article came out in Agronomy Journal just a month or two ago. And so that's what we're going to be going over today. That's the reason I'm going over this, okay? Okay, so here we go. The title of this article is entitled Hybrid Bermudagrass and Soil Response to Liquid Aeration Compared with Hollow-Tine Cultivation by Dr. Henriette Georgia. I don't know how to pronounce these names. It's Wang, and then I think it's Begichki and Tucker, I believe. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing those gentlemen's names. And this was published in Agronomy Journal, one of our top tier journals. We're going to get through this fairly quickly because I want to have time for the tenfold turfgrass at the end. And by the way, tenfold turfgrass is about the lawn care nut, or Alan Hain is on tenfold turfgrass later this evening. So if you're a lawn care nut fan, you might want to skip through that. But if you're not, hang out to the end. You get a treat at the end of the show today. Okay. Introduction. A variety of turfgrass species are used as surfaces for home lawns, sports fields, and golf courses. Although high-end sports fields and golf course putting greens are often established on sand-based profiles, most turfgrass is grown on native soils. Whenever you have a sand-based sports field or putting green, or really anything that's been made out of like a USGA spec sand, it's not possible to have compaction to the point where it would hinder turfgrass growth as long as it's functioning correctly. Because that doesn't have any structure. It's structureless when it's made out of sandpeat. But the sand is so coarse compared to native soil, it's never going to compact to the point where it would be a problem, unless it's just not functioning correctly. But native soils are a whole other matter. Native soils in Florida are very difficult to compact. And when I say that in a general term, very difficult to compact to the point where it would hinder turfgrass potential. But other parts of the world are not like Florida. There's clay soils I live in one of the key areas where it's just a lot of clay. And the soils in Kentucky are heavily clay, and it can get compacted. Holy moly. Thanks a lot, Turf Nerd Ohio. Turf Nerd Ohio, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, you were the very first member of the channel. He just donated $50 to the channel. Every professional lawn care operator in the industry should subscribe and become a member of this channel, he says. And if I'm not mistaken, when I looked at the stats the other day and I sorted it by date, I believe Turf Nerd Ohio was the very first person who ever became a member. And you did it, Turf Nerd, before I even actually announced there were memberships available. I don't even know how you figured that out, but I opened it up one day and I'm like, I'll go ahead and announce it later this evening. And before I knew it, there was a couple people already being members. So I really appreciate that $50 donation. That really means a lot to me. Thanks so much. I appreciate it. Oh, and you said that's correct. Yeah. I believe that's correct. Yeah. It shocked me that it shocks me sometimes that there's even subscribers to my channel. Honestly, I don't know. I mean, a lot of this stuff, it just seems like, well, I think people already know this, so why would I go over it? It's the imposter syndrome sort of thing, that I have. So I'm really pleased when I have members who are contributing real money to support what I do. Thanks really sincerely to all members and subscribers. Thank you so much. Let's get back to the article. An increase in surface hardness and penetration resistance results from the addition of wear and traffic events. Root proliferation is often augmented due to an increase in soil bulk density, therefore decreasing accessibility to moisture and nutrients within the soil profile. And soil bulk density is the soil scientist's manner of measuring compaction. I don't know. I'm not really sure why they didn't measure soil bulk density in this paper. I suspect it's because soil bulk density, if you're going to do it right, is it more of a destructive sampling technique where you have to actually pull a fairly large core? I mean, a core size of a baseball bat almost. I mean, you have to pull a pretty good sized core out, and it takes time to measure the soil bulk density in that manner. But it's the gold standard of measurement with bulk density. So I suspect that's probably why they didn't use that method in this paper. But I'm not sure. They didn't use bulk density. They used a different method of measuring the surface hardness rather than the actual bulk density of the soil. But when we talk about compaction, we talk about soil flocculation or dispersion or these things, as soil scientists, we use soil bulk density, which is grams per cubic centimeter, or the mass in a volume. Okay, reductions in soil porosity may decrease water infiltration and cause puddling at the soil surface or increase runoff potential. Additionally, soil compaction can lead to a disruption in interconnected pore spaces that facilitate the diffusion of gases such as ethylene. A loss of soil structure may lead to accumulation of ethylene surrounding root tips, which triggers the arrest of root growth. Now, you're going to hear in the Tenfold turfgrass later this evening this, and the reason I'm doing it later is because I didn't really understand the con. I didn't understand the scam of liquid aeration. They say it breaks apart structure or breaks apart the soil. I never really understood that because you don't want to break apart the soil. You want to keep the soil held together. And in the Tenfold turfgrass later, this was the best explanation I found on YouTube of how the scam is communicated to the end user to convince them to use it. So it says here in the article that the soil structure may a loss of soil structure. We want to keep soil structure where it's at, or enhance soil structure even further. That's what increases the macro porosity and the water flow, the water channels that move water through the soil. That occurs in the macro pores primarily. And macro porosity, or the pore distribution, not P-O-O-R, but P-O-R-E, the pore distribution increases in the macro porosity whenever we have good soil structure. And it decreases whenever the soil is structureless or it collapses. And so when they say it breaks apart the soil, that would result in soil dispersion, which would reduce macro porosity, which would reduce water movement and increase compaction. So it doesn't do that. Now they're going to say at the end how that it does that, but they're going to explain it further, which even is more compelling or more interesting to me because I didn't understand the con. It never made sense to me. But I'll explain it later in Tenfold later tonight. Alleviation of surface hardness and soil compaction is often achieved mechanically through the use of cultivation equipment. Solid-tine and hollow-tine core cultivation are two of the most popular devices. Benefits may include increased turfgrass density through the stimulation of severed stolons, increased root mass with aerification holes due to an increase in oxygen, reduced accumulation of thatch, decreased disease potential following an increase in airflow through the canopy, and increased root depth as a result of improved water infiltration. Those are all benefits that can occur and have been measured as a result of core and solid-tine aeration. Unfortunately, several negative outcomes can result from the use of these mechanical processes, and I'm not going to go on that, but basically it's leaving cores behind, it's damaging the turf grass, it's a destructive technique, and it's cultivation. You're cultivating the soil in some way. You're also, although they don't mention in here, you're also degrading soil structure. You're puncturing the soil with a probe. I mean, it's maybe only 4 inches deep, but the structure that exists in that top 4 inches is being crushed and destroyed by those tines, whether it's hollow-tine or hollow-tine. The issue is that process necessary in order to alleviate or solve some problem that you're having? In many, many cases, it is necessary. That core cultivation is necessary. My point is we want to minimize any disruption or disturbance of the soil unless it's necessary, because doing so degrades soil structure, and it's going to lead to further problems if you continue to do it for prolonged periods. Having said that, if you need to do it, in other words, if the compaction is so bad that the mass is compacted so much into that volume that you actually have to pull a core out, then do so. But otherwise, I would ask yourself, do you have a good reason to do this? Because if you don't, it may actually result in an opposing effect than what you think might happen. Okay. And believe me, there's many, many good reasons to core aerate. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying have a good reason to do it. We skip down a little bit. Liquid aeration products claiming to remediate soil compaction and replace mechanical cultivation are marketed in the turfgrass industry as soil conditioners. Although the ingredients found within these products may vary, most contain humic substances, seaweed extracts, and essential plant macronutrients. One thing they left out here was potassium hydroxide. They use potassium hydroxide in most of those as well. They also include, in many, many liquid aeration products, they'll use a surfactant or a wetting agent. And that kind of gives the illusion that water is moving into the soil profile, and it's creating more air, or creating more airspace, because the water, where it once was not able to move into the soil, now is able to move into the soil. And that's all a result of the wetting agent, not a result of loosening the soil or anything like that. Humic substances result from the breakdown of plant and animal remains and can be extracted from a wide variety of sources, including coal, peat, soil compost, and raw organic waste. Now, that can be part of liquid aeration products. Brown seaweeds are the second most abundant macroalgae found in temperate oceans and most common sources of seaweed extract used as biofertilizers in agriculture. Benefits from the use of these materials include the growth potential of beneficial soil microorganisms, increased plant stress response, and enhanced nutrient uptake. However, the perennial nature and traffic frequency of turfgrass environments may pose significant challenges to the use, incorporation, and effectiveness of these products. Therefore, the objective of this research was to compare the response of plant and soil parameters to liquid aeration and hollow-tine cultivation. Oh, thanks so much, Efrain Gomez. Thanks. $20 donation. He says, what do I think about soil salinity? From my experience, it has helped with weeds and controlling of fungus. Well, soil salinity, believe it or not, Efrain, might sound very bizarre to the average person maybe listening to this channel, but soil salinity can actually help with some weeds and not necessarily harm the non-target organisms such as turfgrass, so long as it's a salt-tolerant turfgrass such as seashore paspalum. So in some cases where we have we have limited herbicides available to us to use on something like seashore paspalum, there are some methods that can be used to minimize weed presence by using salt, basically. So that's not it's not beyond the realm of possibility, Efrain. But I would say in general, we do not want to intentionally apply salt to our soils. In general, that's a very bad thing. The Bermuda grasses are very tolerant of it. Of course, salt grass is very tolerant of it. Seashore paspalum is very tolerant of salinity. But when you get into some of the other turf grasses, such as bent grass or maybe even bluegrass, I'm not real knowledgeable on the cool season grass salt tolerances. Those are not going to be as tolerant of salt as the Bermuda grasses and the salt grasses and those things. So I wouldn't do it intentionally unless you have the correct turf grass that is tolerant of increased salt levels. Okay, when in regards to controlling fungus, I don't know. I'm not a pathologist. I've never heard of funguses being controlled as a result of salinity, although it certainly seems possible. But the key is to do that without harming the non-target organism or your turf that you want to continue to grow. So that there was some of that work was done in South Florida years ago where they were intentionally applying salt, but it was to seashore paspalum to control the weeds. I wouldn't want to do that on Bermuda. I wouldn't want to do that on any grass other than seashore paspalum or maybe salt grass or something. I'd be very, very careful with that. Okay. Thanks for the donation, Ephraim. Appreciate it. And welcome to the membership. I don't recall when you joined, but welcome to the membership, Ephraim. I hope you enjoy the various things we have on the channel for members only. Okay, back to the article, materials and methods. This research was conducted in Athens, Georgia at the Turfgrass Research Center during the summer of 2020, 21, and 22 on Tough hybrid bermudagrass, maintained at 1/2 inch. The soil type was a Cecil clay loam with a soil pH of 5.9. 3 separate trials were initiated, one in July of 20, June of 21, and June of 22. Each study was conducted on a different section of the fairway each year. So it's not going to be a cumulative effect. We're not applying it to the same location every year. They did the study and then one year and then they moved it to the different location the next year and so forth. Now, so here's the treatments. I'm going to read one treatment and then I'm going to show it in the table. Treatments consisted of monthly applications of a commercially available liquid aeration product, 5% soluble potash plus 8% humic and 4% fulvic acid derived from leonardite at 19 liters per hectare. And then there was a fertilizer, an 1801 from Greene County Fertilizer. Now, Greene County Fertilizer is owned by John Perry, who promoted all this nonsense. And next Tuesday night is going to be a standalone Tenfold Turfgrass next Tuesday night. And it's going to be nothing but John Perry. And we're going to go over, he has many videos of him talking about this complete nonsense, but specifically talking about this research. This research, is my understanding, that John Perry was involved with because he was communicating some of the results of the research while it was still going on. How do I know that? Because this was conducted up through June of 2022, and some of his videos came out before that about this research. And he talks about some of the treatment results, and he completely cherry picks things out. He does not tell the entire story at all. And so I'm going to use that as an example next Tuesday night on Tenfold Turfgrass. Now that I've gone over this PDF, now that I've shown the research in its entirety, we're going to go back and watch some of his videos, and they show you how a charlatan's mind works. Show you exactly how a scam actually works. You're going to cherry pick things out. You're going to pick what works for you, and what doesn't work, you're not going to talk about. And that's what you're going to see next next Tuesday night. Sorry. But let's look about the treatment. So here's the treatments on the table here. We have a non-treated control. And what a lot of people will do, what a lot of companies will do is they'll fund some research and they'll say, okay, well, I want you to compare this research against non-treated control. But that's not biologically relevant. Comparing urea against a non-treated turf grass, of course you're going to see a result. No one's going to do that. No one's going to have a fairway and never apply any nitrogen to it unless you're growing it on organic soils. It's biologically irrelevant. But a lot of companies will say, well, I want you to test my product and I want you to have a non-treated check in there. And okay, I'll say, okay, well, I'm going to also include urea. And they go, no. Don't put a urea in there. Don't do that. Why? Because they know urea is going to either be equal to or greater than their product that costs more than urea. It's happened to me for years, or at least while I was in academia. It happened to me probably every year I was in academia. They didn't want to include urea, but as a scientist, it's going to be extremely difficult to publish that work unless you have the proper controls in here. And Dr. Henry, I don't know the conversations they had in the background, but Dr. Henry put in the proper controls, as you'll see here. He had liquid aeration, which was a treatment, but then he had a fertilizer, a typical fertilizer that you would apply. Okay. Then he had liquid aeration with the fertilizer. These are all checks. These are all controls. More than one control he had to have here. Okay, then he had liquid aeration with seaweed extract. And then he had hollow-tine cultivation done once, hollow-tine cultivation on a separate timing. I guess that was done twice. And then hollow-tine cultivation with liquid aeration. So you got to see how they set up these treatments. It's important to to understand how to set these things up. And I've said this before, you got to be real careful if you're going to go out and do your own research. Because even if you have the best intentions, you may end up being convinced for bad reasons because you didn't set up the treatments correctly. And this is going on from last week's video where I think it was ironite or something. There's been a lot of chat on the channel about ironite. And there's been one particular troll who's like convinced that his ironite, the iron in ironite, is going to do something. Meanwhile, you have many other components in the ironite. And by the way, my members and subscribers have done a very good job of replying to him. You haven't been particularly rude to him. You've been, cogent with your replies and explain that you can't just say it's from one thing whenever there's 3 or 4 things in the product. You have to separate those things out individually, or at least balance them out one way or the other. And that's what these researchers did here. That's what all these treatments are. Okay? So be very careful when you do your own research. All right? You can get off on left field and not even realize it, and have all the true, honest intentions. I mean, and you end up going down the wrong path. You didn't realize it, and you got convinced from your own work, and it was set up incorrectly maybe. Okay? So be careful. Okay, data acquisition. I'm going to do this real quick. They used a Field Scout, which is an instrument that measures the natural green reflectance of light off the grass to measure NDVI, which is a measurement of the color of the grass. They used a Field Scout. That was a CM1000. Then they used a TDR to measure soil moisture. They used a Clegg impact hammer to measure surface hardness. If you've never seen these, it's just scientific instruments that we go out and, torture turf grass with. They used a Field Scout SC900 compaction meter. It's a very similar rod as you push into the ground that you've probably seen, like a penetrometer sort of thing, but it's a little bit more sensitive and probably a little bit more accurate than what you could buy off of Amazon. It should be more accurate. It's like $3,000. Anyway, so he used all these things to measure these variables. Water infiltration rates were conducted using used a field ring. I don't know if you call it a lysimeter or it's a double ring penetrometer. I don't know if he used it. No, he didn't use it. Oh, he used a single infiltration ring. Basically what it is he has a ring out there and he pushes it in the ground, and then you can measure the volume of water that's required to maintain a certain height of water on the surface. And over time, you can measure the flow of water into the soil that way. That's the way they did it in the field. They took 4 soil cores to measure root biomass. So they measured NDVI, they measured root biomass, they used soil penetration resistance, the hardness of the turf, the soil. They measured all these things. Okay, all the things that you would expect to see on a marketing sheet from someone selling liquid aeration. Data were normalized, comparing measurements for all variables and the different. Okay, so so you're going to see the difference, the change in a variable over time, and I want to point out that the difference in each variable measured relative to that variable measured at the initiation. Okay, so when you see changes from the beginning of the study to whatever date after the study, that's what the delta will stand for in this particular study. Okay. Now here I want to point out, here's all the tables. And this is an open access paper, so you can go download this for free in agronomy at Agronomy Journal, okay? And these are all the tables, and you're going to see mean separations denoted by these letters. I'm not going to show this, but I want to point out that they're all here. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show these results in a PowerPoint slide thing here, okay? I think it makes more sense when I show it, but just keep in mind that what I'm about to show is the same thing as this table. It has the exact same numbers on it. And all the other things I'm going to show are going to have the exact same numbers that exist in those tables. So now I'm looking at color on the screen. I have a graph, a bar chart, and I have color. And over here on the right-hand side, we have the weeks after we have the weeks after treatment, 5 weeks, 10 weeks, or 15 weeks after treatment. So all the blue bars here are all the treatments 5 weeks after initiation. And whenever we're comparing, we're looking at these bars, we want to always compare, on this particular example, always compare the same colored bar. And on the y-axis, we have change in NDVI or change in turf color. And on the x-axis, we have all the treatments. So on the left, we have the non-treated color. And you see, and this is going to be change. So how much did it change? So what this means is, because there was an increase, that color of the non-treated turf increased in color. from initiation to 5 weeks after the study started. Now here's liquid aeration right here. It's the exact same number. So liquid aeration is this second bar, and it's the same as the non-treated check. Now you see the fertilizer increased. Okay? So the plots that receive fertilizer increased. Now you see the plots that receive liquid aeration and fertilizer, and it's the exact same thing as fertilizer. So these 4 bars right here will tell you a lot of what you want to know about what's going to happen with the turf grass. And that is the fertilizer is going to increase the color. The liquid aeration alone or in combination with fertilizer is going to do nothing, at least according to these results, over 3 years in Athens, Georgia on bermudagrass. Okay? Let me see if I can, whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. I need to know how to do this better. Right, okay, now we go to liquid aeration plus seaweed extract. And again, you can go back to the table and see the actual separations, but there's no difference between this and the non-treated control. And then you actually see 5 weeks after treatment, the hollow-tine aerifications are the same as well as the non-treated check. So the fertilizer-containing treatments were the only ones that increased the turfgrass color. That's it. Okay? Now, when we go to 10 weeks after treatments, it's essentially the same effect. It's just the colors, the turfgrass is getting greener. There was still no effect of liquid aeration compared to the non-treated check directly. And when you added fertilizer, you saw an increase, but when you added liquid aeration to the fertilizer, you saw no additional increase, none. The liquid aeration in seaweed extract is again similar to the control, if I remember correctly. It's going to be liquid aeration plus seaweed extract is a B compared to it did increase. Liquid aeration and seaweed extract combined were slightly greater than the non-treated check, and they were also but they did not differ from. Am I looking at the right? Yeah, I am. They did not differ from the fertilizer treatment. The fertilizer treatment was still superior. Okay, sorry about that. So the liquid aeration plus seaweed was slightly better than the non-treated check, but the fertilizer was the king. And again, hollow-tine once or hollow-tine twice or hollow-tine with liquid aeration did not increase anything relative to non-treated turfgrass on color. And then you look at the 15 weeks after treatment, and you see that the color actually declined in the non-treated check, and the color declined on all these actually, compared to the initiation. But again, the fertilizer treatments are the ones that are holding the color the most. And the liquid aeration seaweed extract is inferior to just fertilizer alone. The hollow-tine, all the ones with aerification actually reduce the color. Remember, you're damaging the turf grass when you're aerifying it, at least initially. It's going to take time to recover from that. Okay? And that's what you're seeing here in these data. Okay? So for color, liquid aeration gets a big old fat strike. It's not going to help color, and this was 3 years, 3 consecutive summers on tough Bermuda grass. We didn't see any benefit to color when we included liquid aeration with fertilizer. When we did it alone, there was a little bit of increase. I suppose you could say there's a little bit of increase when you did just liquid aeration and seaweed extract compared to nothing. But the argument would, on my end, would be if your argument is I'm going to use liquid aeration and seaweed extract, but I don't fertilize at all, that's a pretty extraordinary claim. In other words, if you got to the point where you're using liquid aeration and seaweed extract on your lawn, you're probably fertilizing with a normal nitrogen fertilizer at some point. If you're not, that's pretty extraordinary. But if you really aren't fertilizing anything with nitrogen at all, and you choose to put out liquid aeration and seaweed extract, this shows you probably will have a little bit of an increase compared to doing nothing at all, but not anywhere remotely close to the increase in color that you're going to see from applying a normal fertilizer like an 1801. Okay? Now let's go to moisture. A lot of the con artists like to talk about soil moisture, and it's going to retain moisture, it's going to move moisture, it's going to move water through or whatever. 5 weeks after treatment, we're looking at the change in soil moisture on the y-axis. And you see, when we're looking at these, we're looking at A reduction below this line is basically more dry, and an increase above the zero line, so a positive change, is more wet. Okay, so more water per cubic millimeter of soil. And so you'll see again, liquid fertilizer, the fertilizer 1801 was the most superior, whereas liquid aeration was inferior to fertilizer. Liquid aeration did have a little bit of more moisture than just non-treated turf. So if you're not going to do anything, and then suddenly you decide to liquid aerate, you might see a little bit more moisture, possible. But if you're already fertilizing, you're not going to see any more benefit. And if you add liquid aeration to fertilizer, you're not going to see any more benefit of that either. Now look what happened with liquid aeration seaweed extract. There was a little bit of retention. There wasn't any different than just fertilizer, but there was some retention of moisture, or more moisture, I should say, when liquid aeration and seaweed extract was applied compared to non-treated turf, but not compared to fertilizer. So again, if you're fertilizing, there's no point in adding liquid aeration. If you're going to increase the soil moisture because you're adding liquid aeration, these data say it's not going to happen. Okay? At least it didn't happen under the conditions of this study. Okay? And then you see the hollow-tine cultivation down here, the hollow-tine aeration cultivation. That's where you see the moisture decline. So we're pulling cores out and we're actually reducing the moisture that was in the soil. In other words, we're allowing more area in the soil and reducing the moisture in the soil by loosening it up, I guess is what you'd say. Okay. So now when we look at the 10 weeks after treatment and the 15 weeks after treatment, give or take, for the most part, it's the same result. It's just a little bit more pronounced. As the further along you go in the study, the drier the non-treated check gets. The moisture remained the same in liquid aeration and remained the same in fertilizer. The liquid aeration plus fertilizer might have been a little less, but basically the same. But what I'm getting at here is the moisture in the soil was the same from liquid aeration, from the fertilizer, and from the liquid aeration plus fertilizer, and when liquid aeration and seaweed extract was applied without fertilizer. So if you want a little more moisture, there's a little bit of evidence here that it's possible to achieve that without fertilizer if you use liquid aeration and seaweed extract. It's possible to have a little bit more moisture in the soil. Again, I would say I don't know many people that are using liquid aeration and seaweed extract and not applying at least some fertilizer. That's pretty, like I said, that's a pretty extraordinary claim. And you'll see down here, the hollow-tine cultivation is where you see less moisture retained. Okay. And then when you add hollow-tine times 2 and hollow-tine 1 with liquid aeration, you actually see an increase in moisture. So this is where you start to see a change in soil moisture, is when you're pulling cores from the soil, not from adding something like a liquid aeration. If you want to have less moisture retention, if you're in saturated conditions or your soil is holding too much water, then aerification will help with that. Let's go to the next one, surface hardness. Now this is where the cons we start to move into the BS claims by charlatans and grifters. The compaction cure is the product that they're going to talk about later in Tenfold Turfgrass tonight. Compaction cure, we're going to cure your compaction. We're going to loosen your soil up. This graph here is talking about surface hardness. This is where they dropped the hammer on the soil and measured how hard the turfgrass, or how hard the soil was. And when we do it at 5 weeks after treatment, the change in surface hardness, the lines of bars above the zero line means it's getting harder. Okay, so the non-treated control is showing an increase of about 20 G maxes. That's the unit of G's of surface hardness. When you add liquid aeration, there was no difference between that and non-treated control. When you add fertilizer, you start to see the soil, the hardness actually become softer. The surface is softer. Same thing with liquid aeration plus fertilizer. So adding liquid aeration to fertilizer didn't soften the surface at all. Okay. And then when you get down here to the aeration products, the cultivation, that's when you start to see the soil surface start to soften greatly. Hollow-tine cultivation 1 and 2, and the hollow-tine cultivation with liquid aeration really start to soften the soil surface. That's when you see the difference. And you notice that liquid aeration with the hollow-tine was no difference. This one right here was no difference than just hollow-tine cultivation by itself. So if you want to soften the soil or soften the surface of your turf, what this is saying is if you want to make a difference, if it's really hard, it requires hollow-tine cultivation. Fertilizer actually is better than just liquid aeration by itself. I mean, statistically, these are probably the same. What was it on the? I'll have to go back to the PDF later. These are basically the same, but it's the cultivation, the actual pulling of a physical core out of the soil, is what's resulting in softer surfaces. Okay, let's go to 10 weeks after. More or less, you see the same result. It's just again a little bit more pronounced. And then 15 weeks after, the non-treated check is getting harder and harder. The surface is getting harder and harder. And the cultivation from core aerification, or the surface firmness from core aeration, is remaining softer than any of these other products. Okay, fertilizer alone is doing everything that liquid aeration is going to do on surface hardness. The fertilizer is doing it alone by itself. So there's no point in adding liquid aeration. It's just going to increase your costs. And you can see that here between hollow-tine cultivation 1 and hollow-tine cultivation 1 with liquid aeration. There's no difference. There's no difference between liquid aeration and liquid aeration with fertilizer. There's no difference between these. You can go back and look at the chart at the PDF when we get done. You'll see there's no differences. It's wishful thinking, basically, on surface hardness. It's not going to soften the surface of the soil, liquid aeration, at least according to these data. 3 years in Georgia. Didn't do squat, basically. Now, it did increase moisture, and we're going to see something a little bit on roots, but other than that, nothing. Penetration resistance. Now, this is where you have like a penetrometer and you're pushing in the soil. This would be roughly the equivalent of pushing like a screwdriver in the soil. I don't like that idea. I don't even like this particular instrument because it's so heavily biased by moisture in the soil. But this is where you're pushing an instrument, a rod, into the soil, and you're measuring the resistance that it takes to push that into the soil, okay? It's a measure of compaction. Penetration resistance 5 weeks after. Non-treated, it's the same. It's 500. It's a change is 500 kilopascals. Positive, meaning it's getting more firm. Liquid aeration is the exact same, 500. Fertilizer is the exact same, 500. All these are exactly the same. In other words, all the treatments, except the treatments that included hollow-tine cultivation, had the same penetration resistance at 5 weeks as the non-treated check. The only thing that's softening or reducing the penetration resistance is the hollow-tine cultivation times 1 and times 2. That's it. We go to 10 weeks after and we go to 15 weeks after, it's the same thing. The soil surface, the penetration resistance is getting harder and harder. It's getting firmer and firmer with the non-treated check. The same thing's happening with liquid aeration, same thing's happening with fertilizer, same thing's happening across the board, except with hollow-tine cultivation 1, which is having less resistance to that rod, and hollow-tine cultivation 2, which is again is having even more, or even having less, more or less. it's an oxymoron. It's having even less resistance to the rod when you hollow-tine cultivation, cultivate it twice. So this is where the money's at, guys and gals. If you want to make more money in a business, and this is indeed the problem, offer core aeration. If indeed that's the problem you have, you're going to go out and start offering liquid aeration, or God forbid you're buying liquid aeration from one of these con men. Man, you might want to think again. You're not getting much out of that in terms of penetration resistance, surface firmness, color, not getting much at all, especially compared to fertilizer. Fertilizer alone is giving you all the results that in liquid aeration ever gives. Let's go to water infiltration. Change in water infiltration. This is in centimeters per hour. 5 weeks, you're actually seeing less water penetrate the soil. So in non-treated check, you're getting, it's less and less water is penetrating the soil at 5 weeks with the non-treated check. Liquid aeration, still below zero. It's still there's still less water penetrating the soil now than there was at the beginning of the study with liquid aeration. It's not increasing water infiltration at 5 weeks. Neither is fertilizer. Neither is this is slightly positive, liquid aeration plus fertilizer. These are all statistically the same. You can go look at the chart. These are all statistically the same. What is resulting in greater water infiltration? Hollow-tine cultivation by a substantial margin. It's going up by 8 centimeters per hour. It went up. That was the change. 8 centimeters per hour, guys. 2.5 centimeters is an inch. Do the math. That's 3 inches. You increase the movement of water into the soil by 3 inches an hour simply by hollow-tine cultivation, doing it once or doing it twice. That's the magnitude that you increase. These other ones, even though there really is no difference, they're basically zero. There's basically no change. But if there was a change, it's like 0.3 or 0.4 inches an hour. Or I'm sorry, centimeters an hour. Not much. And liquid aeration was actually negative at 5 weeks. Okay? Now, when we go to 10 weeks and we go to 15 weeks, again, you see the non-treated check, less and less water is penetrating. This is what this line, this is the reduction here means. Same thing with liquid aeration. Look, less and less water is penetrating the soil or infiltrating through the soil when you go from 5 to 10 to 15 weeks. Don't underestimate that, guys. Look at this, liquid aeration. There's less water at 5 weeks penetrating the soil with liquid aeration than there was at week 0. At 10 weeks, there's even less water than at week 0. At 15 weeks, there's even less water penetrating compared to week 0. Same fertilizer shouldn't have an effect, doesn't have an effect, same thing. But then you see core cultivation, you see the major effect here on 1 at 5 weeks, and then not much of a change at 10 and 15 weeks. But look when you do it twice, 2 core cultivations, and you see a major increase in the amount of water flow through the soil. You're going from 8, increasing it. That's not what it was. That's how much you increased it. You increased it by 8 and by 12 centimeters per hour. So basically from 3 to 4 inches more water flow per hour through that soil by core cultivating it twice. And you're actually resulting in less water when using liquid aeration. I don't know how else to say it. I don't know what more evidence you need to not spend your money on this junk. Let's look at root biomass. There is a little bit of benefit there. If you really want to steel man their argument, then I guess this would help steel man it. 5 weeks after treatment, non-treated, the change in root biomass in grams is 0.01. But all these treatments increase root biomass, including liquid aeration. Liquid aeration increased it compared to the non-treated check. Didn't increase it relative to fertilizer, but it did increase it relative to the non-treated check. Okay, and of course, hollow-tine cultivation resulted in the greatest increase in root biomass at 5 weeks. When you look at 10 weeks and you look at 15 weeks, you see essentially the same thing. There are certain terms of relative differences that the liquid aeration did result in an increase in root biomass relative to nothing, but not relative to fertilizer. And then core cultivation was what really increased the root biomass. If you're looking to increase root growth, and you're already fertilizing, then what this bar and this bar says is that there's no reason to add liquid aeration, because if you're already fertilizing and getting all the benefit you're going to get out of it anyway. Okay? I think that's it on that. Okay. So what I want to do is I want to go back to the paper real quick and just show a couple little things here before we go to Tenfold turfgrass. And that is just to make sure we're clear that this is what I'm talking about. If you want to see the differences between all the treatments, they're all right here. Just look at the letters. And here's the tables where I pulled them from. Okay, this is all the exact same data you just looked at in figure format. And you can see the differences. So penetration resistance, there was no difference in, you see all these colors. There's all the exact same except hollow-tine cultivation. Liquid aeration didn't do anything about penetration resistance at all. Compared to fertilizer, compared to non-treated check, compared to liquid aeration, seaweed, nothing. Hollow-tine cultivation is where you saw benefit. Root biomass, where was a little bit. So let's read the last little part here. I don't know if this is a new criteria for Agronomy Journal, but there really wasn't like a standalone conclusion. They just sort of summed it up at the end of one paragraph. Maybe that's a change in their publication. I don't know, but let me read the last couple paragraphs and then we'll go to Tenfold turfgrass. Increases in soil moisture in response to liquid aeration treatments when compared to non-treated check may be responsible for less of an increase in surface hardness. This becomes further apparent when examining trends in soil penetration resistance over time. Similar increases in penetration resistance observed in liquid aeration and non-treated check plots, despite the greater water retention observed by liquid aeration treatments, suggest that liquid aeration aids in soil moisture retention, but not soil structure alteration. So in other words, it may be lubricating the soil. This is the reason why they have to add a wetting agent into those products because it gives the illusion of softening the soil or loosening the soil. It gives the illusion because water is going into the soil where it once didn't. And they're describing that in a more of a scientific manner. However, humic substances have been associated with an increase in soil aggregate formation and stability, which may have a similar impact on water infiltration and surface hardness. Unfortunately, soil structure changes in response to humic substances application. Let me read this again. It's an important sentence. Unfortunately, soil structure changes in response to humic substance application take time to occur and require extensive incorporation into the soil profile, which may only be possible during seedbed preparation at turfgrass establishments. So what they're implying there, or I should say what I'm inferring from what they said here, is that it's possible to adjust some certain things with humic products like this, but it requires a substantial amount that's probably only going to be able to be applied before the turfgrass is actually established, meaning you can dump a bunch in there, till it in or get it prepped, and then seed it or sprig it or sod it or whatever, and then you might see some benefit. But going over the top of it with these small, inconsequential amounts, just insignificant amounts, it's probably not going to do a whole lot. Okay, last paragraph. A large decrease in surface hardness and soil penetration resistance at 5 weeks after initiation in response to hollow-tine cultivation with minimal changes in soil moisture clearly indicates soil structure alteration as opposed to soil softening from an increase in water retention. So what they're saying is that the change that occurred from the core cultivation was not a result of lubrication of the soil. It was a result of soil alteration of the structure. This is an important paragraph. It's not exactly worded in the most reader-friendly way, but it's a super important paragraph. I'm going to read it and try to interpret it for you. They're distinguishing between what occurred with liquid aeration and what occurred with core cultivation. Liquid aeration, you saw some response, but it was probably a result of the moisture in the soil, and they explained exactly why they had that conclusion. But with core cultivation, they're saying that change was not a result of the liquid and the moisture in the soil. It was a result of soil structure alteration. And they explained why they had that opinion. At 10 and 15 weeks after initiation, the change in soil moisture observed in response to hollow-tine cultivation treatments is either comparable or less than liquid aeration treatments. But surface hardness and soil penetration resistance continued to decrease following hollow-tine cultivation treatments. Did you catch that? The soil hardness continued to decrease even though moisture continued to decrease. That's how they came to the conclusion that it wasn't a result of the moisture, because it's actually less moist than the liquid aeration. The lack of correlation between changes in soil moisture with those observed in surface hardness and soil penetration resistance further illustrates an alteration in the soil structure due to mechanical cultivation. For this reason, mechanically driven cultivation equipment is required to efficiently and effectively remediate compaction that occurs subsurface. Liquid aeration is not a replacement for hollow-tine cultivation, and most of the benefits observed in response to these products may also be achieved with the use of traditional fertility. That is an awesome sentence that Dr. Henry wrote. I'll just be frank. It's fantastic. One thing that I understand why some authors are a little bit trepidatious and a little bit cautious with their language, but when your results are strong, write a freaking strong conclusion. If they're that strong, write it strong. I get it. Editors don't like this firm language. I understand that because there's always a what if. But if you have strong results, write strong conclusions, and that's what Dr. Henry did. Okay, now I'm going to get to Tenfold, but let me look and see if there's any questions. So basically, let me sum up this whole thing. Liquid aeration had a slight influence on moisture. There might have been a little bit of an influence on some root mass, but it did not ever differ from the non-treated check in most variables, and it never differed from fertilizer alone. So the influence of turfgrass on soil surface hardness, on penetration resistance, on moisture retention, all these other things, almost all of the benefit or change that occurred as a result of liquid aeration occurred just from normal fertility alone. And when it came to reducing compaction, that effect was almost entirely the result of core aeration. None of that was measured really from liquid aeration at all. Over 3 years, in Athens, Georgia. Okay. Now let me briefly go back and see if okay, so question 1X and 2. Okay, let me see what Chuck's question is here. Says, is the 1 and 2X hollow-tine each year or over the course of 3 years? Yeah, okay, so if I understand your question correctly, the 1 time per year and the 2 time per year was done, and then they moved the study over slightly, so it wasn't repeated in the same spot on the same exact plot over multiple years. It was done, tested, and then the next year they started in a different location. I think that answers your question, Chuck. Okay. Yeah, William Wood has a very good point. The liquid aeration sales claims are sounding like the gypsum sales claims. That's exactly right. And what boggles my mind is that, well, two things. One is why I was so hesitant to speak up for so many years. Because they would say these things, and I'd go, there's no way that anybody would believe that. Well, that's the imposter syndrome. I'm just assuming that other people know this stuff because you don't want to break up the soil. I assumed that everybody would know that. I'm not saying, one way or the other. I'm just saying I just never spoke up because I was like, no one's going to believe that. That's ridiculous. If you broke up your soil, it'd actually make it worse. So it's disappointing in my mind that I waited so long to say anything about this whole mess. But and then the second thing is really what I already mentioned, and that is that the concepts of these have not been adequately taught. You do not want to disperse soils. You do not want to break apart soils unless there is no option to solve your problem other than doing that. You don't want to do that. So the idea that you're going to break apart soil, liquid aerifiers are going to break apart soil, there is just no way that's ever going to work. It's not going to result in a less compacted soil by breaking it apart. It's going to result in a more compacted soil. And I think the grifter's mindset is it's compacted. So if I break it apart, there's going to be more airspace. I think that's what these charlatans are thinking, I think. Because they don't know soils, they don't realize that the structure itself holding it together is what creates the channels for water to move through. They don't know that because they didn't bother reading a book. They just got on YouTube and started making wild claims and started selling stuff because of it. And they got some success, so they just kept running with it. In fact, they're still running with it, which is what we're about to go in with Tenfold turfgrass. But you're never, ever going to result in that and result in a less compacted soil by breaking it apart, or breaking up the organic matter, or breaking up. It's never going to happen. You need soil structure. Maybe I should just go over soil structure one day. And it's in any undergraduate basic soils textbook is going to have good explanations of soil structure. If you want to know more about it, just go to the library and just get any undergraduate soils 101 book. I don't know what the names of them nowadays are, but just basic soils is going to have a lot of information about blocky structure, platy structure, structural soils, and explain exactly how those structures result in proper airflow. Okay? Yeah, Kuhnhone, I appreciate. I don't know what I don't say a whole lot. I kind of just keep out of the whole chat online. But now I've been reading some of your comments about other people commenting on my channel, Kuhnhone, and I appreciate your comments, as I do the other members who have been mentioned. I think it was a Shawnee's that has some really good replies, or it's a curly head dude. I can't remember the handle. You all have been very polite and very accurate with your replies back to some people who don't completely have everything that it takes to keep from being conned. So I appreciate your participation in the chat on some of the comments of the videos. Yeah, and so John Carmen says there's good money to be made during the month of September performing core aeration. I'm not a fan of doing anything unless you have a good reason. But if you indeed have compacted soils, which again, I kind of doubt, but it's possible, and your turf grass is not going to reach its potential without aerification, then there is a service. You can make money doing that. If you're a lawn care provider, you can do that. I would, as a homeowner, I would want to know, is there indeed good reason to do this? But if there is, then provide that service. Charlie Foxtrot says, what about using wetting agents with liquid foliar fertility? Any advantages, replant uptake, if using chelated iron with nitrogen, would wetting agents be beneficial? Surely research exists. Yeah, there is research on that, but I want to be careful that you're using the right terminology. All wetting agents are surfactants, but not all surfactants are wetting agents. A surfactant is a surface acting agent. That's what it stands for. And what it means is usually it's a hydrophobic and hydrophobic tail and a hydrophilic head on the surfactant. And that moves to the surface of water droplets. And that gives it the name surface acting agent. Make a long story short is, I don't know if you'd want to use a wetting agent, because a wetting agent will tend to move that moisture into the soil profile. It'll lower the bonds, the water bonds between the bonds between water, and it'll help that water penetrate the soil, but it might not help it stick on the leaf. Surfactants will. Some types of surfactants will, but you want to be careful which surfactant you're using. I wouldn't want to go out with like 0.4 pounds of liquid ammonium sulfate with a surfactant and not water it in, unless I wanted to kill the grass. Might do that if I wanted to kill the grass, but I would be real careful about using surfactants and wetting agents. They are extremely effective and useful, but you need to know what you're doing. You can have the exact opposite effect of what you're going for, because surfactants are going to stick it on the leaf and it's going to stay there. Wetting agents are going to move it in the soil profile. So which one do you want? Do you want the nutrient to move in the soil, or do you want it to stay on the leaf? If you want it to stay on the leaf, then you better know exactly what you're doing, because it will stay on that leaf until it gets absorbed. And if the rate's too high, you risk a lot of tip burn. And if it's the wrong type of nitrogen, wrong source of nitrogen, you could really screw things up real fast. Okay, so there is benefit to using those surfactants with liquid foliar fertility, but I would exercise caution unless you're a professional. Okay, good question. Aziz, I've been applying 0.5 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet as urea. Oh wait, 0.5 pound per 1,000 square feet of urea per month, and watering it in. Should I continue this in the hotter Michigan months of July and August? I don't live in Michigan. I'm assuming you have Kentucky bluegrass up there, or some sort of bluegrass up there, I would think. I wouldn't. I mean, in the middle of, but I don't know July and August. I can speak for Kentucky. And in July and August in Kentucky, it's hot and it's usually dry. And I stop my nitrogen applications, if I do apply nitrogen. I stop those like the first or second week in May. So I'm done. I'm not applying any. And then even those are light. I'm not applying 1 pound in the middle of May. It's usually a light application, and it depends on April or May, 1st of April, and then again in May maybe. And then July and August, I do think the turf grass needs a little bit of nitrogen in those hotter months. But I wouldn't be out there pushing it with 0.5 pound a month as a liquid in the middle of July and August. So what I would do in Michigan, I would contact Michigan State. I'd look at their website and see what they have, like a lawn care calendar for Michigan, and see if they recommend nitrogen applications in July and August. I would be surprised if they do. They probably have something like 0.5 pound in the spring and 1 pound or 1.5 pounds or 2 in the fall, with limited, if any, nitrogen applications in July and August. Okay, that would be my recommendation. And for those who don't know, there's a link in every description of every live video, a PDF that tells you the university, the land-grant university turfgrass program in your closest location in the United States. Everywhere in the United States that has a turfgrass program, it's in a PDF in the description of every live video. So you can click on it. Hey, I live in Indiana. You click on it, you find it's Purdue. I live in Michigan. You can find out it's Michigan State. And I recommend you go to those websites and see what they recommend for those applications. Okay. Let me get my ducks in a row here and see if I can get this thing set up. I think I got it set up. Let's go to the last part of the show, and I will close it out with Tenfold Turfgrass. Let's see what Tenfold Turfgrass is about today. In this mini episode of Tenfold Turfgrass, we are going to go to Lawns Across America. They had a podcast come out just a couple of weeks ago, and it was really good timing because I never could figure out the scam. It just didn't make sense to me. And I've heard John Perry give his spiel about it, and I've heard a couple people talk about it. I think it was Jake, the lawn kid, or somebody. I can't remember who it was. And I'm like, breaking apart the soil. What are you talking about? It doesn't make any sense. And so the best I've found so far was just a video done just a couple weeks ago by Alan Hain. And he has an hour and a half long thing here. I'm only going to go over 1 minute of it, literally 1 minute. But in here, he has a little 1 minute blurb where he's talking about exchanging one of his, or two of his products that are liquid aeration products for a new product called Compaction Cure. So he's going from one bottle of sear stones to another bottle of sear stones. Have no delusions, guys. There's nutrients in that fertilizer. There may be some nutritional value to it, but it is not, as we just showed on the channel with the PDF, the scientific publications, it is not going to loosen your soil or alleviate your compaction, increase the turf color or anything like that compared to normal fertilizer. It's going to do zip. Okay. Core aeration is the way to go if you indeed have a problem, but not this liquid aeration stuff. But now he has a new scam, and he's going to talk about it a bit, but in so doing, he explains a little bit better exactly what it is or what the scam is. So let's see what Alan Hain has to say about their scam, him and John Perry scamming people in terms of using liquid aeration to alleviate their compaction. Let's see what Alan has to say about it.
For a while. And so when he has something new, he'll go, hey, if we're going to do that, I'll say, hey,
He's talking about John Perry, just so you know.
Said, I want to do Compaction Cure this year, and I want to combine it with, I want to have to not sell Aerate and RGS anymore as two things. I'd like to sell one. He goes, all right, fine. We're also going to put this surfactant in there.
Okay, so he's talking a lot in there real quick, just so we're clear. He's talking about Compaction Cure. He used to sell Aerate. I guess he still does. That's the product we're talking about. That's the product. Aerate is the product that was used in the science article that we just went over tonight. That is the exact product, Aerate. And so I think what they're doing is they're getting rid of that, or they're, I don't know, discontinuing it or something, and they're merging it into a new product called Compaction Cure. Okay. Now let's hear him explain what it is and or how it's going to do this.
I was like, okay. And I just trusted him on. He goes, this is going to help with water penetration because that's part of the whole goal here. That's why you have the sea kelp in there and the humic too, right? Is you have the surfactant that breaks the surface tension. And I'm going to talk about that in a while. We're going to talk about right here in a minute. We're going to talk about a water drop penetration test that I did at a golf course with this expert. But anyway, so you put the surfactant in there so everything penetrates.
And that will happen. Every wetting agent, he says surfactant, but I think what he means is wetting agent. A wetting agent is a surfactant, so he's not wrong. It's just every wetting agent is going to result in that effect. It's going to loosen the surface tension of water and help the water move into the soil. That's part of the smoke and mirrors of liquid aeration. Aerate, that's part of the smoke and mirrors. It's a convincing distraction, essentially. Oh, well, it went in the soil. It didn't go in the soil before. Man, that stuff's great. That's part of it. But notwithstanding, having a product or having a component in the product that helps moisture move into the soil is going to be beneficial if you couldn't get moisture to go into the soil to begin with. So that part or that component of this new product and Compaction Cure, whatever, is very likely going to be beneficial in conditions of hydrophobic soils. So that part I'm in agreement with. Now he explains what's going to happen with the rest.
And then you have the sea kelp in there to stimulate roots to now grow down. So you have water penetrating, which water penetrating opens up space. That's the aeration.
How does water moving in help open up space? That's what I just don't understand. I mean, he's explaining it, but even his explanation, which is the best I've heard, I don't get it. Water moving into the soil is going to help open up space. This man is colossally ignorant. I don't know what else to say. There is X amount of space in the soil. Okay, let's call it 50% air, 50% solids. Let's just call it that. When water goes in, water is going to take up some of the air space. Let's just say you put in 25% of the water that would take up 25% of the air. Water took up 25% of the air. So now the space has 25% water and 25% air. How much space is still in that soil? Let's say you had 100 cubic centimeters of space in that soil and you put in 50 cubic centimeters of water. 50 cubic centimeters of the air is 50 cubic centimeters of the 100 is now water. How much space is in the soil? It's still 100. It's just 50 of it is air and 50 of it is water. There's no increase in porosity. There's no increase in space. And it just, I mean, for a long time, I was trying to give them the benefit of the doubt. Like, well, what are they talking? I just didn't understand what they're talking about. But if that's the argument, water moving in is what increases the space, which is what he said. I mean, let me back up just a hair here. We're at 28:19. Let me see what he said.
To now grow down. So you have water penetrating, which water penetrating opens up space.
So water penetrating opens up space. I'll tell you, I'll steel man his argument. The only way that water penetrating is going to open up space is if it goes in and then freezes. If water penetrates and then freezes, then it can open up some space. That could happen. And I'm sure that happens a lot where he's from in Florida, right? I mean, it's not going to happen. Yeah. Yeah, it blows me away. And unfortunately, the majority of people, aren't soil scientists. They're not going to know this stuff. I guess they don't know it. I don't know. But when you have charlatans like Alan Hain who get on here and confidently, they have a great, successful business, I'm assuming, and they're selling a lot of product, and the result of their products like fertilizers and so forth and their recommendations result in a good lawn. Well, surely it was partially as a result of this product. He must know what he's talking about. He doesn't know what he's talking about on this product. This is right here on the screen. This is what a BS artist looks like right here. He's completely full of it. But he says it with such confidence in a very compelling manner. And that's the dangerous thing. Let's see what else he has to say here.
It's the aeration. It's not mechanical. It's water penetrating. And then you have the potassium hydroxide. That's what we call the liquid aeration. That breaks bonds.
Yeah, see, so he is talking about potassium hydroxide breaking bonds. What bonds? It just makes no sense. The only thing that it could possibly have any activity on in terms of breaking something would be the organic material. That's the only thing. But I'm assuming you don't want to do that because organic material is good for the soil, right? You don't want to break all that up. I don't know what the scam is. It makes zero sense. Even if you did break up all the organic matter, it's still not going to increase the space. The porosity is still going to be essentially the exact same as the paper we just went over showed.
That creates space. Now you have water penetrating with bonds being broken because of the potassium hydroxide, creating more space. Now you have sea kelp to stimulate rooting. Roots go down to help claim the space and hold the space. And then you have humic to fill in all around so that they make homes for the microbes, which also helps to make space. That is how the compaction cure works.
Okay, so that's his spiel. That's it. That's the total. That's the total explanation. It's complete and utter nonsense. The evidence refuting it is substantial at this point. It didn't increase anything to do with moisture. Didn't have any effect on soil penetration, any beneficial effect on soil penetration. There was no beneficial effect on turfgrass color, particularly compared to fertilizer. There was no benefit in surface hardness. It did not soften the surface of the soil at all, especially compared to fertilizer also. The only thing that resulted in softening the surface, increasing the moisture penetration, water penetration, was core cultivation. It's just that simple. You know, and somebody asked on one of my videos, it might have been about Alan too. They said, do you think he knows he's being dishonest? And that is not easy to answer. That is not easy to answer because you have to know what's going on in their mind. And the only person who knows what's going on in Alan's mind is Alan Hain. So that goes into the difference between BS and lying. In other words, in order for him to be a liar, he has to know that what he's saying is not true. But you can just BS. You can say something and it not be true, but you just didn't realize it wasn't true because you were convinced about something else and it didn't really matter to you whether or not it was true or not. That's BS. Or you could just be honestly mistaken. You could say something that's not true and you were just mistaken. You didn't know it was not true. But when you know it's not true and you say something contrary, that's a lie. And so in this case, when Alan watches this video, which I guarantee you he's going to eventually watch this video, the PDF shows you clearly, Alan, that what you're saying is not true. So now you know what you're saying is not true. So now, whatever you said in the past, I can't say anything about that. Maybe you believed it, maybe, I don't know. But now moving forward, you know it's not true. The evidence is there to refute what you're saying. So now moving forward, if you continue to say that, then somebody else could make that claim that you're intentionally being dishonest. It's sad. It really is. It's hard to come back up that rabbit hole, especially when that rabbit hole is full of cash. It is not easy. You got to climb over a mountain of cash to get back up that rabbit hole in his case. And that takes a very honorable person to do that, a very strong-willed person to get past all that. And I'm not at the moment convinced that he's that type of person to do that. Anyway, anything else before I go? I think that's all I got. I'm gonna say goodnight for tonight. I will be back on Monday for the members only. For the new members, remember we have a members only live show every Monday morning. Only members can come watch that. Only members can ever watch that. And we'll do this next Tuesday night. Okay. This is true, William. This is true. William Wood says, congratulations, Alan. You've convinced people to put pricey, soapy humic on their lawns. And he has. Him and John Perry. John Perry is we'll go over him next week. John next Tuesday night will be nothing but John Perry. It'll probably just be one video. He has like 5 or 6 videos about this whole nonsense. We'll probably just go over one of them. But that's right. They have convinced people that putting on soap water and humic on their lawns is going to be more beneficial than core aeration or more beneficial than just normal fertilizer. And that's a very sad thing. That really is a testimony to the failure of academicians like myself. We have failed. I mean, and I fully acknowledge that. Academicians have completely failed the end users, at least in this regard through this channel, because there's not many academicians doing this type of work. There's a whole lot of people like Alan Hain and John Perry, and they're winning that war. They definitely are winning that war. There's no question about it. So anyway, I'll let you guys go for the day. Thanks so much for showing up. We had a huge crowd tonight. I'll be back on Monday morning for the members only show. Until then, have a great week. I really appreciate everybody supporting the channel and subscribing. Have a good week. Bye.